A sharp, metallic click echoed through the apartment, slicing through the heavy morning silence. It wasn't the sound of something breaking, but of a lock engaging, of something being sealed, a destiny being coldly, bureaucratically etched. She stood there, frozen in the hallway, her eyes fixed on the door as it closed, not from the inside, with the familiar intimacy of a goodbye, but from the outside, with the impersonal finality of an eviction. A man in a dark suit, a briefcase clutched in his hand, turned to her, a look of professional regret on his impassive face, a mask of formality barely concealing the inconvenience of the situation. No words were exchanged, just a curt nod, a final gesture that seemed to carry the weight of an irrevocable verdict, a sentence delivered without the right to defense. The click of the key in the lock was the period at the end of an unsaid sentence, a life that had just been rewritten without her consent, without her participation, as if she were a mere spectator to her own unfolding tragedy. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Her throat was dry, her voice trapped somewhere between shock and disbelief. She only felt the air thin in her lungs, an invisible pressure crushing her chest, as if a giant hand were squeezing her, stealing her breath. The world around her seemed to have lost its color, sounds muffled, as if a thick layer of glass separated her from reality, transforming everything into a distant, unreal scene. The scent of fresh coffee that once filled the kitchen, an aroma of comfort and routine, was now a distant memory, replaced by the cold, metallic odor of despair, of an ending. Her fingers tightened on the hem of her blouse, the fabric crumpled under the force of her hand, the only outward manifestation of the storm raging within her, a whirlwind of contained emotions. That apartment, once a sanctuary of laughter and dreams, of whispered plans and promises, was now just an empty shell, a tomb for broken promises, for a future that was slipping away. She closed her eyes, seeking an instant of darkness to hide, to escape the image, but the locked door, the man's distant gaze, persisted, burned into her mind, a tattoo of pain. The silence that followed was not one of peace, but of a deafening void, the sound of the absence of everything that was once hers, of everything she had built with such care and dedication. It was the sound of mourning for a life abruptly, unceremoniously gone. Months earlier, Sarah's life was a mosaic of small pleasures and grand hopes, a canvas painted with vibrant colors of happiness and optimism. A talented and dedicated graphic designer with a keen eye for aesthetics and a passion for transforming ideas into visual reality, she masterfully balanced her career and motherhood. Her husband, Ethan, an architect with grand ambitions, always dreaming big and possessing a charisma that captivated everyone, was the center of her universe, the father of their beloved 5-year-old daughter, Lily. To outsiders, they were the picture of a modern, successful family, living in a cozy and elegantly decorated apartment in Portland's Pearl District, with plans for an even brighter future, perhaps a bigger house, exotic trips, Lily's education at a top school. Sarah spent hours in front of her computer, immersed in her projects, bringing ideas to life through images, while Ethan sketched designs on his drafting table, dreaming of imposing skyscrapers and iconic buildings bearing his signature. Lily's crystalline laughter, a pure and infectious sound, was the constant soundtrack of their home, a daily reminder of the love that united them, the joy that filled every corner of that space. Sarah was proud of the home they had built together, not just the walls and hand-picked furniture, but the atmosphere of affection, complicity, and mutual support they cultivated. She believed in Ethan, in his undeniable talent, in his ability to turn any dream into reality, to overcome any obstacle. This unwavering faith was the foundation of everything, the rock upon which their happiness was built. But behind the facade of perfection, a silent, insidious shadow began to stretch, corroding the foundations of that seemingly solid life. Ethan, with his charisma and ease in making friends, also harbored an impulsive side, a dangerous attraction to risk, a thirst for adrenaline that he kept secret. What began as innocent bets on football games with friends, a form of leisure and socialization, quickly transformed into a secret compulsion, fueled by the thrill of the game and the illusion of easy money, of a quick fortune. He hid his losses, minimized the risks to himself, and each small victory propelled him to go further, to seek larger sums, to fall into a vicious cycle of debt that he couldn't or wouldn't break, trapped in the web of his own unchecked ambition. Sarah, immersed in her creative work and caring for Lily, only noticed small changes in her husband's behavior: Ethan's increasing irritability, the nights he came home later, the whispered phone calls he took in another room, the way he avoided certain topics. She attributed everything to work stress, to the pressure of his ambitious career, and tried to be even more understanding, more present, more patient, without imagining the web of lies and debts he was weaving in the shadows, a net that was about to swallow them all. The truth, when it came, was not a discreet whisper, but a deafening scream that shattered the peace of her world. It was a Tuesday afternoon, an ordinary day, as Sarah was finishing an urgent project, focused on her computer screen, when the doorbell rang insistently, with an urgency that wasn't that of a neighbor or a delivery person. Opening the door, she was met by two serious-faced men in impeccable suits, and a court officer, whose presence already announced something grave. They didn't ask permission, they simply entered, a briefcase full of documents in hand, the formality of their movements contrasting with the invasion of her space. The air in the apartment seemed to freeze, dense and heavy. "Mrs. Sarah Miller," one of them asked, his voice grave and emotionless, a tone that brooked no questions. "We are here to execute a confiscation order. This property is being repossessed by the bank due to accumulated debts." The words hit Sarah like physical blows, each syllable a hammer to her head. Confiscation? Debts? She tried to argue, to say there was a mistake, that they had a mortgage in good standing, that everything was in order, but the documents in their hands were irrefutable, cold and impersonal. Ethan had taken out colossal loans, using the apartment as collateral, and the payments had been overdue for months, a criminal negligence. It wasn't just bank debts, there was also mention of loan sharks, of exorbitant interest rates that grew exponentially, of veiled threats that seemed to leap from the pages of a crime novel. Sarah's world collapsed in an instant, pulverized by the cruelty of reality. She felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, her head spinning in a whirlwind of disbelief and panic, a vertigo that prevented her from thinking clearly. Lily, who was playing in the living room, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding, ran to her, sensing the tension in the air, the abrupt change in atmosphere. "Mommy, what's happening?" the girl asked, her eyes wide and frightened, reflecting the terror she saw on her mother's face. Sarah hugged her tightly, trying to shield her from that cruel reality invading their home, from the silent violence of bureaucracy. The men began to catalog their belongings, to move furniture, to empty the life she had built with so much effort and love. Every object, every memory, every piece of their history, seemed to be torn from her hands with a silent but devastating violence. Lily's crib, the dining table where they shared meals and laughter, the photos on the wall that captured happy moments, everything became part of a list of losses, an inventory of a shipwreck. The humiliation was palpable, the gaze of curious neighbors peeking through the door, the awkward silence of the men doing their job with merciless efficiency. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, as if her dignity was being stripped bare in public, for everyone's judgment. Where was Ethan? How could he do this? The pain of betrayal mingled with the despair of loss, and the only thing that mattered was the safety of her daughter, who was now at risk, without a roof over her head, without a certain future. Anger began to bubble up, a cold fury against the man who had destroyed everything. The apartment, once vibrant with the life, laughter, and dreams of Sarah, Ethan, and Lily, was now an empty echo, a tomb of memories. The bare walls seemed to scream the absence of colorful paintings, carefully chosen furniture, and photographs that captured happy moments. Sarah and Lily were forced to move into a small room at Sarah's mother's house, Grandma Helen, a woman of grit with a huge heart, but with fragile health and an already cramped space where every inch was contested. The move was a hard blow for Lily, who didn't understand why she couldn't sleep in her own room anymore, why her toys were piled in boxes, and why Mommy cried softly at night, hidden in her pillow. Sarah tried to disguise her pain, inventing stories about an adventure at Grandma's house, about a vacation season, but the sparkle in her daughter's eyes had diminished, replaced by an early melancholy, a shadow of sadness that accompanied her. Each night, as she tucked Lily into bed, Sarah felt the weight of guilt and helplessness, an overwhelming burden. She had promised a safe and happy world for her daughter, and now, that world was crumbling beneath her feet, swept away by Ethan's irresponsibility and greed. Ethan, for his part, had vanished like a ghost. After the apartment's confiscation, he simply disappeared, evaporated, leaving Sarah to deal alone with the chaos he had created, with the ruins of a life. The few times she managed to contact him, his words were evasive, full of empty promises that he would fix everything, that it was just a misunderstanding, that he needed time. But days turned into weeks, and the situation only worsened, like an infected wound. The loan sharks, once just a terrifying mention in the confiscation documents, began to manifest concretely and terrifyingly. Anonymous phone calls at any hour of the day or night, threatening messages left on the voicemail, and even unwelcome visits to Grandma Helen's house, which left Sarah in a panic, her heart pounding. They wanted Ethan's money, and they didn't care who paid the price, who suffered the consequences. Lily's safety, which was once an abstract concern, became a real and imminent threat, palpable in every shadow, in every noise. Sarah felt cornered, trapped, like a wounded animal trying to protect its young with its last ounce of strength. Her anger at Ethan grew daily, mixed with a deep sense of abandonment, betrayal, and overwhelming loneliness. Amidst the despair that consumed her, the only person who seemed to understand the depth of her pain and the complexity of her situation was her longtime friend, Claire. Claire, a practical, resolute woman with a huge heart, was the sister of a renowned fertility specialist, Dr. Julia. She visited Sarah frequently, bringing food to help with expenses, helping with Lily so Sarah could have a moment to breathe, and, above all, listening, offering a shoulder to cry on and words of comfort. During one of these visits, while Lily slept peacefully in the small room and Grandma Helen was in the kitchen preparing tea, Claire sat beside Sarah on the small living room sofa, her gaze serious and thoughtful. "Sarah, I know what I'm about to say might sound crazy, it might shock you, but you need to hear it, you need to consider it," Claire began, her voice low and cautious, as if she were treading on eggshells. "My sister, Dr. Julia, is working on a very delicate, very specific case. A wealthy couple with complex fertility issues is desperately looking for a surrogate mother. They are very demanding, they need someone with a specific blood type, with an impeccable health history, and you fit all the requirements perfectly." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, an electric shock that made her recoil. A surrogate mother? The idea was absurd, almost offensive, an affront to her maternal essence. To carry a child for someone else? Her body, her essence, her maternal love, how could she even consider something like that, something so intimate and personal? Claire's proposal hung in the air like a dark cloud, laden with moral, ethical, and emotional dilemmas, a suffocating weight. Sarah felt a knot in her throat, a mixture of instinctive repulsion and a strange, almost imperceptible, spark of hope, a faint light at the end of the tunnel. "Claire, are you crazy? I can't do that. It's against everything I believe in, against my principles, against my nature," Sarah whispered, her voice choked with tears that threatened to fall. The idea of giving away a baby she would carry in her womb for 9 months, of feeling its first movements, of hearing its heart beating strong, of forming such a deep bond, and then simply handing it over, seemed an unimaginable torture, a pain she wouldn't be able to bear. It was like tearing a piece of her soul, of her own flesh. She thought of Lily, of the unconditional and overwhelming love she felt for her daughter, and the prospect of carrying a life for another family filled her with an existential void, a deep anguish. Claire, however, didn't back down, maintaining a firm and understanding gaze. "Sarah, I know it's difficult, that it's a decision that goes against everything you've ever thought. But think carefully, with a clear head. They pay very well. Enough for you to pay off all of Ethan's debts, ensure Lily's safety, give her a future, and start your life over from scratch, far from all this mess. It's a way out, Sarah. The only one I see now, the only one that can get you out of this hole." Those words, ensure Lily's safety, echoed in Sarah's mind, overriding all her moral objections, all her fears and prejudices. The image of the loan sharks, the threatening phone calls, the constant fear she felt for her daughter, was an unbearable burden, a sword hanging over her head. She looked at Lily's sleeping face, who slept in the next room with the innocence of a child, and felt a pang in her heart, a physical ache. What wouldn't she do to protect her daughter? What wouldn't she sacrifice, endure, face? The humiliation of losing everything, Ethan's betrayal, her family's vulnerability, all of it pushed her to a precipice of desperate decisions, of choices she never imagined she'd have to make. The idea of being a surrogate mother, once unthinkable, once an aberration, began to infiltrate her thoughts as a last, painful alternative, a last resort to save what remained of her life. It was an extreme sacrifice, a renunciation of a part of herself, of her identity, but perhaps it was the only way to rebuild Lily's life, to give her the safe and happy future Ethan had stolen. The decision wouldn't be easy, it would be the hardest of her life, but the need to protect her daughter was stronger than any dogma, any prejudice, any personal pain she might feel. It was maternal love in its purest, most sacrificial form. Sarah's decision didn't come from a sudden epiphany, a moment of instant clarity, but from a series of sleepless nights, spent wide awake, her mind in a whirlwind. It came from furtive glances at a sleeping Lily, whose innocence she so desperately wanted to preserve, and from silent conversations with her own conscience, debating the pros and cons of such a drastic choice. With each passing day, the pressure from the loan sharks mounted, their threats becoming more explicit, closer, more terrifying. One day, an anonymous note was left on Grandma Helen's door, with a photo of Lily leaving school, an innocent smile on her face, an image that chilled Sarah's blood. Panic froze Sarah's blood, turning her fear into terror. It was no longer about money, no longer about material possessions, it was about her daughter's life, her safety, her integrity. That night, with a broken heart, torn apart by anguish, she called Claire. Her voice choked, the words almost inaudible, she said, her voice trembling, "I accept. I'll do it. I'll be a surrogate. But I need guarantees. I need to know Lily will be safe, that nothing bad will happen to her." The surrender was not a sign of weakness, but of an overwhelming strength, the strength of a mother willing to do anything, to sacrifice herself for her child. The following days were a blur of exhaustive medical exams, consultations with lawyers specializing in reproductive law, and formal meetings with Dr. Julia, Claire's sister. Sarah felt like a piece on a chessboard, moved by forces greater than herself, by a destiny that seemed to have been charted without her permission. Dr. Julia, an elegant, professional woman with impeccable composure, explained each step of the assisted reproduction process with a clinical coolness that contrasted sharply with the emotional storm Sarah was experiencing. The exams confirmed that Sarah was the ideal candidate, her rare blood type and impeccable health were exactly what the couple was looking for, a perfect combination of biological factors. The contract was extensive, full of complex clauses and legal terms she barely understood, but one stood out, shining like a promise. A substantial sum would be deposited into a secure account, accessible to Sarah only after the birth and delivery of the babies. It was the price of her hope, the value of Lily's safety, the cost of a future she was desperately trying to rebuild. Sarah signed, feeling the pen heavy in her hand, each stroke a renunciation, a sacrifice, a surrender of herself. The meeting with the contracting couple was a shock, a revelation that left her breathless. Sarah had imagined discreet people, perhaps even a little shy, given the very particular circumstances. But what she found was a famous architect, renowned for his audacious projects and incalculable fortune, the same Andrew Miller her husband so envied and spoke of with admiration, almost with obsession. Beside him, his wife, Rebecca, a woman of stunning beauty, with fine, elegant features, but with a cold, distant gaze that seemed to evaluate Sarah from head to toe, as if she were an object at auction, merchandise to be inspected. Andrew, despite his imposing demeanor and reputation, seemed more restrained, with a glimmer of apprehension and even sadness in his eyes, a contrast to his wife's harshness. Rebecca, however, made no effort to disguise her disdain, her superiority. "I hope you understand the seriousness of your role here," she said, her voice polished but sharp as a blade. "You are carrying my children. Don't forget that, not for a second." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The humiliation of being treated as a mere vessel, a rented womb, a human incubator, was almost unbearable, an affront to her dignity. The situation became even more complex and painful when Rebecca imposed a non-negotiable condition, a demand that seemed designed to maximize Sarah's discomfort. She would have to move into the couple's mansion for the entire pregnancy. "We need to ensure you follow all our guidelines, that you have the best nutrition, the best medical and psychological care. And, of course, to avoid any unnecessary attachment," Rebecca declared, her tone icy, cutting, without any trace of empathy. The idea of separating from Lily for so many months, of living under the same roof with that arrogant and cold woman, was a torment, a psychological torture. Sarah tried to argue, to plead, to explain the importance of being near her daughter, but Rebecca was unyielding, inflexible. "Either it's this way, or there's no deal. Find another way to pay your husband's debts, if you even can." The veiled threat was clear, an ultimatum that left her with no options. Sarah felt trapped, with no escape, no glimmer of hope. The night the loan sharks invaded Grandma Helen's house was the point of no return, the moment all of Sarah's doubts dissipated, replaced by a painful certainty. Sarah was in the room, trying to calm Lily, who was scared by the street noises, when she heard shouts and the sound of things breaking in the living room. The men, furious at the lack of payment, had lost their patience, what little they had. They didn't touch Lily, but the sight of terror in her daughter's eyes, the girl's uncontrollable crying, clinging to her desperately, was enough for Sarah to make her final, irrevocable decision. The next morning, with a shattered heart, torn apart by the pain of separation, she said goodbye to Lily. The girl, not understanding the gravity of the situation, clung to her mother, asking when she would return, her voice choked. "Soon, my love. Mommy will be working a little far away, but I'll be back soon, I promise," Sarah promised, tears silently streaming down her face, wetting her daughter's hair. That hug, the smell of Lily in her arms, would be her strength in the months to come, her anchor amidst the storm. She would move into Andrew and Rebecca's mansion, accepting the sacrifice, the humiliation, the separation, all for her daughter's safety, for the future she deserved. Andrew and Rebecca's mansion was a world apart, a labyrinth of ostentatious luxury and glacial coldness, where every object seemed to scream wealth, but where human warmth was a rarity. Sarah felt like an intruder, a silent shadow in a grandiose setting that didn't belong to her, a stage where she was merely an extra. Her room, though spacious and elegantly decorated with expensive furniture and fine fabrics, felt like a gilded cage, a place where she was confined, not welcomed. The rules were clear and implacable, dictated by Rebecca with unquestionable authority: strict meal times, frequent medical appointments, and absolute rest. Rebecca supervised everything with a vigilant eye, every gesture of Sarah's was scrutinized, every word measured, as if she were under constant evaluation. Andrew's presence was rarer. He spent most of his time in his office, immersed in projects, or on business trips, but when he was present, his aura was one of contained melancholy, a contrast to his wife's harshness and impatience. Sarah felt like an object, a vessel, a means to an end, and with each passing day, her longing for Lily tightened her chest, a constant, searing pain that accompanied her in every corner of that imposing house, in every silent hallway. The first days in the mansion were marked by an overwhelming loneliness, an emptiness that consumed her from within. Sarah tried to adapt to the imposed routine, to the curious and sometimes judgmental glances of the staff, to the absence of any human warmth, any comforting word. Meals were silent, with Rebecca making pointed and critical comments about Sarah's diet, always with a tone of superiority and disdain, as if she were overseeing an experiment. Andrew, when present, tried to be polite, asking perfunctory questions, but the tension between him and Rebecca was palpable, a silent abyss separating them, an invisible barrier of resentment and distance. Sarah observed the couple's dynamic, realizing that, behind the facade of wealth and success, there was a deep unhappiness, an emotional void that all the money in the world couldn't fill. She wondered what had led them to this extreme decision to have a child through a surrogate mother, but she didn't dare ask, aware of her place there. Her function was clear: to carry a life, not to question other people's lives, not to invade the privacy of her employers. The in vitro fertilization process was a mix of hope and apprehension, an emotional roller coaster. Sarah felt her body being invaded by hormones, by medical procedures that left her vulnerable, by an expectation that wasn't entirely hers, but that enveloped her. She tried to emotionally disconnect, repeating to herself, like a mantra, that this baby wasn't hers, that it was just a job, a means to an end, a way to save Lily. But human nature is treacherous, and the maternal instinct, powerful. When Dr. Julia confirmed the pregnancy, a small tremor ran through Sarah, a spark of life that touched her deeply. It was real. There was a life growing inside her, a new existence she was carrying. She tried to suppress the emotion, but a spark of something new, something maternal, ignited within her, a connection she couldn't control. Rebecca, upon receiving the news, displayed a cold, satisfied smile, an expression of triumph, as if she had achieved a goal. Andrew, on the other hand, allowed himself a more genuine smile, a glimmer of relief and gratitude in his eyes, which Sarah noticed and stored in her memory, a small ray of light amidst the darkness. The first routine checkup, a few weeks later, brought an unexpected twist that shook Sarah to her core, completely changing the perspective of her journey. Lying on the examination table, watching the ultrasound screen, she heard Dr. Julia say, with a voice that tried to be neutral, professional, but carried a tone of surprise and even admiration, "Sarah, it looks like we have a surprise here. It's not one baby, it's two. You're pregnant with twins." The words echoed in the room, hitting Sarah like lightning, a shock that left her speechless. Twins? It wasn't one, but two hearts beating inside her, two lives she was carrying. The shock was immense, joy and panic mixing in a whirlwind of contradictory emotions. She had prepared herself to give away one baby, to detach from one life, but two. The bond she tried to avoid, that she tried to suppress, began to form even more intensely, more uncontrollably, more deeply. It was as if her body and soul were refusing to follow the contract, to detach. The news of the twins generated distinct and revealing reactions, further exposing the personalities of Andrew and Rebecca. Rebecca, upon learning, was furious, her anger exploding in cutting words. Twins? That wasn't in the contract. It's absurd. More expenses, more complications, more problems, she fumed, her voice full of indignation and selfishness, without any trace of joy or emotion. Her concern was purely logistical and financial, devoid of any maternal instinct. Andrew, however, reacted differently. Though initially surprised, a slow, emotional smile spread across his face, a glimmer of genuine happiness. He looked at Sarah with a gratitude she had never seen before, a look that seemed to acknowledge her sacrifice in a way Rebecca never would, never could understand. Two children, he murmured, almost to himself, his voice choked with emotion, and for a brief moment, Sarah saw a glimpse of a different man, a father, behind the facade of the famous and successful architect. The distance between Andrew and Rebecca deepened even further with this news, a crack becoming an abyss, and Sarah felt that, somehow, she was becoming a central piece in a family drama that went far beyond the surrogacy contract, a drama that inescapably involved her. The news of the twin pregnancy, though an initial shock that destabilized her, brought with it a strange and unexpected shift in the mansion's dynamic, subtly altering the relationships between its inhabitants. Rebecca, after her initial outburst of anger and frustration, became even more distant, almost absent, as if the twin situation was a problem she preferred to ignore. She spent most of her time away, at luxurious social events, business trips, or meetings with friends, leaving Sarah under the care of the house staff and, surprisingly, Andrew. The architect, previously reserved and distant, began to approach Sarah with a caution and gentleness she hadn't expected, an attention that surprised her daily. He inquired about her well-being, about the babies growing in her womb, and even about Lily, demonstrating an empathy and concern that contrasted sharply with his wife's coldness and disinterest. Sarah felt confused by this closeness. Was it gratitude? Compassion? Or something more complex, a nascent feeling she couldn't decipher, that left her uneasy? The days dragged on, slow and full of silent expectation, and Sarah's belly began to swell, a constant reminder of the life she carried and the immense sacrifice she was making. Her longing for Lily was an open wound, a constant, aching pain that accompanied her every moment, and the daily calls to Grandma Helen's house were her only solace, her only link to her own life. Lily, in turn, felt her mother's absence deeply, and her nightly cries, which Grandma Helen sadly reported, were an echo of Sarah's pain, a shared lament. During one of these calls, Grandma Helen mentioned that Lily had a high fever and wouldn't stop asking for her mother, calling out for her amidst her delirium. Sarah's heart clenched with physical pain and unbearable anguish. She needed to see her daughter, if only for an instant, to calm her, to hug her. Driven by an uncontrollable and desperate love, Sarah decided she would make a secret visit to Lily on the girl's birthday, which was fast approaching. It was an enormous risk, a breach of Rebecca's rules, but the need to hug her daughter was stronger than any prohibition, any fear. On Lily's birthday, Sarah meticulously planned, with the precision of a spy. With the discreet help of one of the mansion's drivers, a kind man of few words who seemed to pity her situation, she managed to leave the house under the pretext of a routine medical appointment, forging a doctor's note. The journey to Grandma Helen's house was a mix of growing anxiety and contained euphoria, an emotional roller coaster. Upon arriving, the sight of Lily, with a small birthday cake and a clumsy party hat on her head, made Sarah's tears flow freely, warm and uncontrollable. The hug was tight, full of accumulated longing and silent promises that everything would be all right. Lily, with her bright, joyful eyes, wouldn't let go of her mother, showering her with kisses and innocent questions. Sarah spent a few precious hours with her daughter, singing happy birthday with a choked voice, telling stories, and trying to absorb every second of that reunion, every touch, every smile. It was a balm for her wounded soul, a reminder of why she was going through all of this, the purpose of her sacrifice. However, the joy of the visit was brutally interrupted, like a dream dissolving. Upon returning to the mansion, Sarah was confronted by a furious Rebecca, her eyes flashing with rage and betrayal. "Where were you, Sarah? I thought you had a doctor's appointment." Rebecca screamed, her voice sharp as a whip. "I know you went to see your daughter. You broke the contract. You broke the trust we placed in you." Sarah tried to explain herself, stammering excuses and justifications, but Rebecca wouldn't listen, her fury uncontrollable. "You are irresponsible. How dare you put my children at risk for a sentimental whim? You have no idea what you could lose, what's at stake." The threat was clear, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, a cold fear. The humiliation of being reprimanded like a child, the pain of having her maternal love questioned and diminished, was excruciating, a psychological torture. Andrew, who was present, watched the scene in silence, his face a mask of discomfort and helplessness, but he didn't intervene, didn't say a word in Sarah's defense. Still shaken by Rebecca's humiliating scolding, Sarah received a call from Claire that left her in shock, an even harder blow. "Sarah, I need to tell you something." "It's about Ethan." Claire's voice was choked, hesitant, as if she was afraid to deliver the news. "I saw him. He's not working. He's with someone else." Sarah's heart froze, a terrible premonition washing over her. "Who?" she managed to ask, her voice almost inaudible, barely able to breathe. "With Hannah. That friend of yours from work. I saw them together, at a fancy restaurant, holding hands, laughing." The news hit Sarah like lightning, a thunderclap that left her stunned. Hannah? Her friend of years, confidant, to whom she had entrusted her fears and hopes, her deepest anxieties? And Ethan, who should have been fighting to resolve the situation, to save them, was enjoying a secret romance, living a life of luxury and betrayal. The betrayal was double, profound, and the pain she felt was even more intense than the loss of the apartment, than the humiliation of the confiscation. It wasn't just the money, it wasn't just the humiliation, it was the breaking of all trust, of all the love she had placed in him, of all the friendship she valued. Sarah's world collapsed once more, into 1,000 pieces, and she found herself alone, pregnant with twins for strangers, with her husband betraying her with a friend, and her daughter's safety still uncertain, hanging like a constant threat. The revelation of Ethan's betrayal with Hannah was an emotional earthquake for Sarah, a seismic shock that shattered what remained of her faith in people. It wasn't just the infidelity, the breaking of the marital pact, but the rupture of a years-long friendship, the violation of a trust she considered unshakable, sacred. Hannah, her confidant, to whom she had confided about her difficulties with Ethan, about the despair of losing the apartment, about the unthinkable decision to be a surrogate mother, now revealed herself as a traitor. The image of Ethan and Hannah together, holding hands, laughing in a restaurant, etched itself into Sarah's mind like a deep scar, a wound that wouldn't heal easily. The pain was so intense that it momentarily overshadowed even her longing for Lily, a mourning for a life she believed she had. She felt doubly betrayed, doubly humiliated, and the anger, previously contained, a dormant ember, began to bubble within her, mixed with an overwhelming sadness, a feeling of total abandonment. The days that followed were a silent torment, an internal battle she fought alone. Sarah tried to maintain her composure in the mansion, displaying a facade of normalcy, but her insides were in tatters, shattered. With each ultrasound, each movement of the babies in her womb, the complexity of her situation intensified, the moral dilemma deepened. She was carrying the lives of others, of strangers, while her own life crumbled in betrayals and abandonments, in irreparable losses. Andrew, noticing the change in Sarah's mood, the sadness in her eyes, tried to approach her more frequently, with a delicacy that surprised her. He brought books about motherhood, asked about her desires, about her fears, and even shared some of his own apprehensions about fatherhood, about the future. There was a vulnerability in Andrew that Sarah had never imagined, a human, sensitive side that Rebecca seemed to ignore or completely disdain. This subtle, almost imperceptible connection at first, began to form between them, a bond of mutual understanding, of silent support, amidst the chaos that surrounded them. The pregnancy advanced, and with it, complications. On a rainy, gloomy afternoon, while Sarah was alone in the mansion, she felt a sharp, sudden pain, a pang that made her double over. Panic seized her, a cold fear that something was wrong with the babies. She called Dr. Julia, who instructed her to go to the hospital immediately, without losing a second. Andrew, who was in an important meeting, was notified and rushed to meet her, abandoning everything. At the hospital, doctors confirmed the onset of premature labor, a real threat to the twins' lives. Sarah was admitted in a hurry, and the news of the twins at risk shook everyone, especially Andrew. Rebecca, upon learning, called Andrew, not to ask about Sarah or the babies, but to complain about the problems the situation was causing in her social schedule, in her commitments. Andrew, for the first time, reacted with irritation, abruptly hanging up the phone, a sign of his growing frustration with his wife. While Sarah was in the hospital, fighting to keep the babies in her womb, the tension between Andrew and Rebecca reached a critical point, a climax of misunderstanding. Andrew spent hours by Sarah's side, talking, trying to calm her, reading to her, offering her comfort she found nowhere else. He showed genuine concern for her well-being and that of the babies, something Rebecca seemed incapable of feeling, of expressing. During one of these visits, Andrew received an urgent call, and his face paled, the color draining from his features. "Sarah, I was in an accident. My car. I need to go," he said, his voice trembling, his gaze distant, as if in shock. Before Sarah could react, before she could ask anything, he was gone, hurried. Hours later, Dr. Julia entered Sarah's room, her face grave, her eyes full of sadness. "Sarah, Andrew, he was in a serious car accident. He's in a coma. The prognosis is uncertain, very delicate." Sarah's world stopped, spinning in slow motion. It wasn't just the baby's father, but the man who, somehow, had become a point of support in her loneliness, an unexpected friend. The news of Andrew's accident and his comatose state plunged the mansion into a funereal silence, an atmosphere of anticipated mourning. Rebecca, instead of showing concern or sadness, seemed more irritated by the situation, by the inconvenience it represented for her. She refused to visit Andrew in the hospital, claiming she couldn't bear to see him that way, that the sight disturbed her. In a cold and calculating conversation with Sarah, Rebecca revealed her true face, her cruelty. "Sarah, if Andrew dies, we won't need these babies anymore. You understand, don't you? We can get rid of them. No one needs to know, it will be a secret." Rebecca's words were a brutal shock, a punch to Sarah's gut. Get rid of? She was talking about lives, about her own children, about human beings. Sarah felt a deep hatred and an unshakable determination, a strength she didn't know she possessed. "No. I won't do that. I won't harm a hair on these babies." Sarah replied, her voice firm, despite the tremor in her body, the rage that consumed her. At that moment, the connection with the twins solidified, becoming an unbreakable bond. They weren't just a contract, They were lives she would protect with all her strength, no matter the cost, even if it meant facing Rebecca. Sarah's vehement refusal to get rid of the babies was a turning point, a point of no return in her journey. In that crucial moment, she was no longer just a surrogate mother, a woman fulfilling a contract. She was a fierce protector, a lioness defending her cubs with the strength of an ancient instinct. Rebecca's threat, instead of intimidating her or making her retreat, ignited an unshakable flame of resistance in her heart, a courage she didn't know she possessed. She felt that, despite all the adversities, all the losses and betrayals, she had a greater purpose, a responsibility that went far beyond the clauses of a contract. The twins in her womb, who were once a moral and emotional dilemma, were now the embodiment of her strength, her struggle, her dignity. The mansion, once a place of oppression and loneliness, became the battlefield of her dignity, the stage of her resistance. Andrew remained in a coma for weeks, and the mansion, once merely cold and impersonal, was now a mausoleum of uncertainties, a place where hope seemed to have died. Rebecca, after her frustrated attempt to manipulate Sarah and get rid of the babies, completely withdrew, immersed in her own world of superficiality and selfishness. She spent her days in luxurious beauty salons, high society social events, and meetings with lawyers, always with an expression of boredom and impatience, as if her husband's illness were a mere inconvenience. Sarah, on the other hand, felt a strange and deep need to be near Andrew, a connection that propelled her. She visited the hospital daily, sat by his bed, talked to him in a low voice, told him about the babies, about Lily, about life outside, about the world that awaited him. She read books, sang lullabies to the twins in her womb, and somehow, felt that her voice, her presence, could reach Andrew, bring him back from the abyss of his coma. On a gray, rainy afternoon, as Sarah read a book to Andrew, her voice soft and melodious, she felt a slight squeeze in his hand, an almost imperceptible movement. Her eyes widened in shock and hope. He had moved. She called the nurse, and within minutes, the medical team was in the room, urgently assessing the situation. Andrew was waking up. The news spread quickly through the hospital corridors, but the joy was tempered by a harsh reality, a cruel truth. Andrew had woken up, but he was paraplegic. The accident had irreversibly damaged his spinal cord, and doctors held little hope that he would walk again, that he would have a normal life. The news plunged Andrew into a deep depression, an abyss of despair. The brilliant architect, the man who built dreams and skyscrapers, was now trapped in his own body, his mind tormented by the loss of his mobility and his identity, of everything he was. Rebecca, upon learning of Andrew's paraplegia, reacted with a mixture of repulsion and cold calculation, without any trace of compassion. She visited him only once in the hospital, and her words were cruel, sharp as knives. "You're useless now, Andrew. What will we do with you? And with these babies? I'm not going to spend my life taking care of an invalid, a dead weight." Her words were like knives, cutting the little hope Andrew still had, tearing his soul apart. He shut himself off, refusing to eat, to do physical therapy, to fight for his life. Sarah, who witnessed the scene, hidden behind the door, felt a deep compassion for Andrew, a pain that struck her to the core. She saw the pain in his eyes, the humiliation of being treated that way by his own wife, the woman who should love and support him. At that moment, Sarah decided she wouldn't abandon him, that she would be by his side, no matter the cost. Sarah took on the role of Andrew's caregiver, not out of contractual obligation, not out of an imposed duty, but out of a genuine choice, an impulse from the heart. She spent hours with him, not just helping him with physical needs, with exercises and hygiene, but, more importantly, with emotional ones. She listened to him attentively, encouraged him with words of strength, reminded him of his undeniable talent, of his ambitious projects, of the children who were on their way, who needed him. She pushed him in his wheelchair through the mansion gardens, showing him the sun, the flowers, the life that still existed outside, the beauty of the world. Slowly, with Sarah's tireless patience and persistence, Andrew began to react, to emerge from his shell. He started eating, doing physical therapy with more effort, glimpsing a small spark of hope in his future. Sarah's presence, her soft voice, her look of support and understanding, were the only balm for his wounded soul, the only light in his darkness. With each small step of Andrew's progress, Sarah felt a victory, a purpose that filled her, that gave meaning to her own pain. Sarah's constant presence in Andrew's life began to work a slow but noticeable miracle, a gradual rebirth that no one expected. Physical therapy sessions, once a painful and meaningless burden for him, became moments of sharing, deep conversations, and small daily victories. Sarah not only helped him with the exercises, with the exhaustive repetition of movements, but motivated him with inspiring stories, with the promise of the children on the way, with the vision of a future he had abandoned in his depression. She reminded him of his passion for architecture, bringing him magazines and books about new projects, rekindling the creative flame that depression had almost extinguished, that despair had suffocated. Andrew, previously reclusive, bitter, and hopeless, began to smile again, a faint smile at first, almost imperceptible, but one that gained strength and sincerity each day, illuminating his face. The connection between them deepened, built on shared vulnerability, mutual compassion, and a respect that transcended circumstances, that went beyond any contract. While Andrew slowly emerged from his darkness, from his personal abyss, Rebecca distanced herself even further, immersed in her own selfish and obscure plans. Sarah noticed Rebecca's prolonged absences, the whispered phone calls in hidden corners of the mansion, the way she avoided any mention of Andrew or the babies, as if they didn't exist. Rebecca's coldness was a stark contrast to the warmth and complicity developing between Sarah and Andrew, a dichotomy that became increasingly evident. One afternoon, as she passed through one of the corridors, Sarah overheard Rebecca's phone conversation, in a low voice, but audible enough for the words to reach her ears. "Yes, the divorce will be as quick as possible. And the fortune, oh, the fortune will all be mine. He's an invalid now, he can't fight, he can't defend himself." Rebecca's words were a shock, a punch to Sarah's gut. She wasn't just abandoning Andrew in his moment of greatest fragility, she was planning to steal his fortune, taking advantage of his vulnerable condition, his inability to defend himself. Rebecca's cruelty was even deeper and more calculating than Sarah imagined, revealing a dark and unscrupulous soul. Sarah's pregnancy advanced into the third trimester, and her belly, now enormous with the twins, was a visible testament to her journey, to her sacrifice. With each kick, each movement of the babies in her womb, the bond with them grew stronger, more unbreakable, more visceral. She felt a mixture of joy and apprehension, knowing that the moment of separation was approaching, but also feeling a deep connection with those lives she carried, a bond she wouldn't be able to break. Andrew, for his part, was increasingly involved, more present. He gently touched Sarah's belly, talked to the babies in a low voice, and his eyes shone with renewed hope, with the promise of a future. He had found a new purpose, a reason to fight, to live, and that reason was his children and the woman who carried them, the woman who had rescued him from darkness. Andrew's rehabilitation was an arduous, painful, and lengthy process, but he was determined, driven by an inner strength that propelled him. With Sarah's tireless help and a team of dedicated physical therapists, he began to make impressive progress, exceeding doctors' expectations. First, small movements in his legs, then the ability to sit unsupported, to maintain balance, and finally, with the aid of a walker, his first hesitant, wobbly, but meaningful steps. Each step was a victory, a testament to his unshakable willpower and Sarah's tireless support, who was always by his side. The mansion, once a place of despair and loneliness, was now a stage of overcoming, of rebirth. Andrew looked at Sarah with a gratitude that went beyond words, a look that expressed not only recognition, but a deep and growing affection, a love that blossomed amidst adversity. One evening, as Andrew and Sarah were in the garden, watching the stars twinkle in the dark sky, he opened up about the accident, revealing a secret that tormented him. "Sarah, I remember something. It wasn't an accident. I was pushed. Someone cut the brakes on my car." Andrew's words were a shock, a lightning bolt that struck her directly. An assassination attempt? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, a cold fear. "Who would do such a thing, Andrew?" she asked, her voice trembling, almost inaudible. He hesitated, his gaze distant, lost in his memories. "I don't know. But I feel like something is very wrong." And Rebecca, she was so strange before the accident, so distant, so cold. Suspicion hung in the air, heavy and dark, like a storm cloud. Sarah realized that the web of intrigues and dangers was far more complex than she imagined, that the surface of luxury hid a deep darkness, and that Andrew's life, and perhaps hers and the baby's, was still at risk, under the gaze of a hidden enemy. Andrew's confession about the accident, the terrifying suspicion that the brakes were deliberately cut, cast an even denser and more sinister shadow over the mansion, transforming luxury into a suspenseful setting. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine, a chill that made her tremble. Rebecca's cruelty, which previously seemed limited to emotional coldness and selfishness, now revealed itself as potentially criminal, with the capacity to take a life. Andrew's life had been deliberately put at risk, and the possibility of Rebecca's involvement was terrifying, a truth that deeply shocked her. Sarah and Andrew began to converse in whispers, exchanging meaningful glances, aware that they needed to be cautious, that walls had ears. The mansion, once a refuge of luxury and apparent security, transformed into a stage of intrigue, where every step, every word, every gesture, could be observed, interpreted, used against them. Andrew, with a clearer mind and a body responding surprisingly well to physical therapy, began to piece together the puzzle, like a private detective. He remembered a heated argument with Rebecca the night before the accident, about a high-risk financial investment he had refused and that she insisted on making, an exorbitant sum of money. He also recalled a mechanic Rebecca had recently hired to service his cars, a man he had never seen before, with an evasive gaze and a suspicious demeanor. Sarah, in turn, began to observe Rebecca with a more attentive eye, noticing the secret phone calls she made in a low voice, her hurried and unexplained departures, and the way she avoided any eye contact with Andrew, as if she were hiding something. The web of lies and betrayals began to unravel, revealing a much more sinister and elaborate plan than they could imagine, a scheme of murder and theft. Sarah's pregnancy was in its final stages, and the anticipation of the twins was palpable, a mix of anxiety and joy. Andrew, now able to move with more autonomy, to walk with the aid of a walker, spent hours in the baby's room, which Sarah had decorated with care and simplicity, transforming it into a cozy nest. He carefully assembled the cribs, organized the tiny clothes, and spoke to the babies in her womb, promising them a future of love and security, a happy life. With each gesture, each word, the bond between Andrew and Sarah strengthened, transforming into something that went far beyond gratitude or compassion. It was a love born of adversity, of overcoming, of building a new family amidst the ruins of their past lives, a love that united them in an unbreakable way. While the connection between Sarah and Andrew blossomed, Sarah's husband, Ethan, reappeared unexpectedly and menacingly, like a ghost from the past. He had discovered Sarah's pregnancy and Andrew's fortune, information that left him furious and greedy. Driven by desperation and envy, Ethan invaded the mansion one night, his eyes bloodshot with rage, demanding money from Sarah. "You're carrying a millionaire's children, Sarah. I'm entitled to a share of that. I'm the one who put you in this situation, after all," he shouted, his voice laden with resentment and false superiority. Sarah tried to argue, to explain the situation, but Ethan was beside himself, his eyes fixed on the wealth he believed was his by right, for having caused all the misfortune. Andrew, who was upstairs, heard the commotion and came down with difficulty, confronting Ethan with a courage that surprised everyone. The confrontation between Andrew and Ethan was tense and explosive, a clash of wills and histories. Ethan, blinded by greed and hatred, was not intimidated by Andrew's presence, who was still fragile but determined. "You think you can steal my wife and my children, you invalid?" Ethan bellowed, his voice full of hatred and contempt. Andrew, despite his physical condition, remained calm, his voice firm and authoritative. "Sarah is not your property, Ethan. And these are my children. Get out of here now, or I'll call the police and you'll regret it bitterly." Andrew's threat, though spoken with serenity, carried an undeniable force, a determination Ethan didn't expect. Ethan, realizing he wouldn't get what he wanted at that moment, retreated, but not before casting a vengeful look at Sarah, a look that promised retribution. "You'll regret this, Sarah. You and your babies. I'll be back and I'll take what's mine." Ethan's veiled threat left Sarah in a panic, a cold fear that paralyzed her. She knew he was capable of anything, and the safety of her children, and now Andrew's, was once again at risk, more than ever. Ethan's threat hung over Sarah like a dark, storm-laden cloud, and with each passing day, her anxiety mounted, eroding her peace. She knew he was unpredictable, a ruthless man, and that, driven by desperation, envy, and greed, he could do anything to get what he wanted. The safety of Lily, of the twins she carried in her womb, and even of Andrew was in imminent danger, a sword hanging over their heads. Andrew, for his part, was determined to protect Sarah and his children, at any cost. He intensified his investigation into the accident, using his contacts and sharp intelligence to uncover the truth behind Rebecca's plot. With each new discovery, Rebecca's web of lies became more evident, revealing a meticulous and cruel plan to get rid of Andrew and inherit his fortune, without any remorse. Sarah's pregnancy was at its most critical point, the 9th month, and the twins were almost ready to be born, eager to come into the world. With each contraction, each movement of the babies, Sarah felt the proximity of childbirth and the imminent separation, a bittersweet mix of emotions. However, the bond with Andrew had become unbreakable, a deep connection that united them. They spent hours together, planning the future, dreaming of a life where they could raise their children together, free from the shadows of the past, from betrayals and threats. Andrew had become Sarah's safe harbor, the man who saw her not as a rented womb, but as a strong, courageous woman worthy of love and respect. The love between them, born of pain, overcoming, and complicity, was a beacon of hope amidst the storm that surrounded them, a light guiding their steps. The truth about Andrew's accident came to light dramatically and shockingly, revealing the extent of Rebecca's cruelty. With the help of a private detective he had secretly hired, an experienced and discreet professional, Andrew obtained irrefutable evidence, recordings of Rebecca's conversations with the mechanic, bank statements of suspicious cash payments, and even testimonies from employees who had seen Rebecca tampering with Andrew's car days before the accident. The revelation was devastating. Rebecca had not only planned the accident but was also in cahoots with a lover, an unscrupulous man she intended to use to get rid of Andrew and take control of his fortune, his empire. Rebecca's cruelty was even more shocking than they could imagine, revealing a dark soul devoid of any humanity. Amidst this overwhelming discovery, the unexpected happened, an even crueler blow. Ethan, consumed by rage, greed, and a desire for revenge, carried out his threat. On a stormy night, with lightning cutting across the sky and thunder echoing, he invaded the mansion again, this time with the intention of kidnapping Sarah and the babies, to extort Andrew. He was accompanied by 2 thugs, brutal and unscrupulous men who didn't hesitate to use force. Sarah, already in labor, feeling the first strong contractions, was dragged out of the house, while Andrew, still fragile but with surprising inner strength, tried to stop them. "Let her go. Don't touch her," Andrew shouted, his voice full of despair and fury, but he was restrained by the thugs, who immobilized him. Ethan, with a sadistic and victorious smile, dragged Sarah to a car, demanding an exorbitant ransom from Andrew. "If you want to see your children and your wife alive, prepare a fortune, Andrew. And don't call the police, or they die." Sarah was taken to an abandoned shack on the outskirts of the city, a dirty and precarious place where the wind howled through the cracks. The contractions intensified, and the fear of giving birth in such an unsanitary place, under the gaze of dangerous men, was overwhelming, a terror that consumed her. Ethan, in his fury and desperate greed, administered a substance to Sarah, something to speed up the labor and increase pressure on Andrew, a cruelty without limits. Sarah felt her body weaken, her vision blur, but her mind was focused on protecting the babies, on keeping them safe. Meanwhile, Andrew, driven by a love and a fury he had never felt before, managed to free himself from the thugs and, with a strength that seemed to come from somewhere else, from a divine source, stood up. He was no longer paraplegic. The adrenaline, the desperation, the love for Sarah and his children propelled him to move, to fight, to run. He knew there was no time to lose, that every second was crucial to save his family. The sight of Andrew standing, propelled by a force that defied logic and medicine, was a testament to the overwhelming power of love and desperation. He was no longer the man weakened by paraplegia, the architect trapped in his own body. He was a hero, a warrior, driven by a primal instinct to protect his family, to save the lives he loved so dearly. With the help of the private detective, who was already investigating Rebecca and had been alerted by Andrew about Ethan's imminent threat, they followed the kidnapper's trail, a frantic race against time. With each mile covered, each clue found, the urgency increased. Sarah, in the abandoned shack, felt the contractions intensify, becoming more painful and frequent, and the substance administered by Ethan began to take effect, dangerously accelerating labor, putting her life and the babies' lives at risk. The fear of losing the babies, of failing to protect them, of failing in her mission, was an agony that consumed her, a pain that surpassed the physical. As Andrew and the detective approached the shack, Sarah fought to maintain consciousness, not to faint amidst the pain and panic. Ethan's thugs, nervous about the delay in the ransom and the situation becoming uncontrollable, argued among themselves, increasing the chaos and tension in the environment. Ethan, in his paranoia and blind greed, didn't perceive the gravity of Sarah's situation, focused only on the money he hoped to extort from Andrew, oblivious to his ex-wife's suffering. With each contraction, Sarah felt a searing pain, a tearing in her body, and cold sweat streamed down her face, wetting her hair. She knew the babies were in danger, that every minute counted, and her only hope was that Andrew would arrive in time, that he would save her. She whispered words of encouragement to the twins in her womb, promising them that she would fight until her last breath, that she would not abandon them. The rescue was explosive, a whirlwind of action and adrenaline. Andrew, with fierce determination and superhuman strength, stormed the shack, closely followed by the detective, who acted with precision. The confrontation with Ethan and his thugs was brutal, a desperate fight for life. Andrew, despite his recent and still incomplete recovery, fought with surprising ferocity, driven by the image of Sarah in suffering, by the threat to his children. The detective, trained for high-risk situations, neutralized the thugs with agility and technique, while Andrew threw himself to protect Sarah, placing himself between her and danger. Ethan, in a final act of cowardice and desperation, tried to flee, but was intercepted and immobilized by the detective, who handcuffed him. The scene was chaotic, with shouts, sounds of struggle, the approaching police siren, and Sarah's muffled cries, who was on the verge of giving birth, exhausted and terrified. Sarah was in critical condition, on the verge of collapse. Emergency childbirth was imminent, and the substances administered by Ethan had put her life and the baby's lives at severe risk, dangerously accelerating the process. Andrew, with the detective's help, managed to get her out of the shack, where an emergency medical team, alerted by the detective, was already waiting, ready to act. The ambulance sped to the hospital at high speed, and Andrew held Sarah's hand tightly, whispering words of love and encouragement, promising that everything would be all right. He was there, by her side, witnessing the strength and courage of the woman who had become the center of his world, the mother of his children. At the hospital, the medical team acted quickly, with precision and urgency, fighting to save Sarah and the twins, in a battle against time. After hours of agony and uncertainty, of agonizing waiting in the hospital corridors, the news finally arrived, bringing relief and joy. The twins had been born. A boy and a girl, small but strong, with vigorous cries that filled the room. Sarah was exhausted, but alive, and the babies, though premature, were stable, breathing on their own. Andrew, seeing his children for the first time, felt an overwhelming emotion, a love that filled him completely. He held them in his arms, tears streaming down his face, and promised them a future of love, security, and happiness. The lives of Sarah and the babies had been saved, and the family they were building, born of pain, overcoming, and love, was finally complete. Rebecca, for her part, was arrested for her involvement in Andrew's accident and the kidnapping, her machinations finally uncovered and punished by justice. Ethan was confronted with the consequences of his actions, facing justice for his crimes of kidnapping, extortion, and assault, a deserved fate for his cruelty. 3 months had passed since the chaos of the kidnapping and the miracle of the emergency birth, a period of recovery and the construction of a new reality. Sarah's life had transformed radically, like a rebirth. She was no longer the humiliated and desperate woman from the beginning of the story, but a figure of unshakable strength, admirable resilience, and overflowing love. The twins, named Lucas and Emma, were the embodiment of her victory, little miracles that filled the mansion with childish laughter, babbling, and a love that spilled into every corner. Lily, who had moved into the mansion with Sarah, was radiant, finally having her mother nearby and 2 little siblings to love, to play with, to care for. The house, once a place of coldness and intrigue, was now a vibrant home, full of warmth, affection, and the contagious joy of a united family. Andrew, for his part, had fully recovered, not just physically, but emotionally, rising from the ashes of his tragedy. The paraplegia, which seemed a cruel and irreversible sentence, had been overcome by his unshakable willpower and Sarah's tireless support, who never gave up on him. He not only walked again but also ran, living with an intensity and gratitude he had never known before, valuing every movement, every sensation. The near-fatal experience had transformed him deeply, showing him what truly mattered in life: true love, family, the ability to overcome any adversity with faith and courage. He had become a dedicated father, a loving partner, and a man who cherished every moment, every smile, every hug. Rebecca was convicted for her involvement in Andrew's accident and the kidnapping, facing the severe consequences of her cruelty, greed, and unscrupulousness. Her fortune was confiscated, and she lost everything she had planned to steal, ending up in prison, with nothing. Ethan, in turn, was arrested and awaited trial for kidnapping, extortion, and assault, facing a long sentence for his heinous crimes. Justice, though delayed, had come for those who caused so much pain and suffering, bringing a sense of reparation. Sarah felt a deep relief, knowing that Lily was finally safe, free from threats and the shadow of her father, who could no longer harm them. On a sunny afternoon, in the mansion's blooming garden, Andrew prepared an unforgettable surprise for Sarah. With Lucas and Emma in his arms, small and smiling, and Lily by his side, her eyes sparkling with curiosity, he knelt before Sarah, an emotional smile on his face, his eyes welling up. In his hand, a simple ring, but laden with meaning, a symbol of his love and commitment. "Sarah, you saved me. You saved my children, you saved my life. You showed me the true meaning of love, family, and overcoming. I can't imagine my life without you, without our children. Will you accept to be my wife, my partner, the mother of our family forever, building a future together?" Andrew's words were a balm to Sarah's soul, the reward for all the pain, all the sacrifice, all the struggle. Tears streamed freely down Sarah's face, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming joy, a happiness that filled her completely. She looked at Andrew, at their children, at the life they had built together, brick by brick, amidst the ruins, and felt a deep peace, a sense of completeness. "Yes, Andrew. 1,000 times yes," she replied, her voice choked with emotion, barely able to speak. Andrew placed the ring on her finger, and they embraced, sealing the union of a rebuilt family, stronger, more united, and more full of love than ever. The setting sun bathed the scene in a golden, warm light, and the laughter of Lucas, Emma, and Lily was the perfect soundtrack for that new beginning, for the promise of a bright future. Life, in its unpredictability and cruelty, can pull the ground from beneath us, confronting us with betrayals and humiliations that seem insurmountable, capable of destroying us. But it is in the depths of pain, in the abyss of despair, that we discover the true strength within us, the capacity to resist and to fight. Dignity is not lost in falls, in moments of weakness, but reaffirmed in the courage to rise, to move forward, to rebuild. True love, often, is born in the most unexpected places, flourishing amidst the ruins, amidst adversity, and justice, though it may be delayed, always finds its way, rewarding perseverance, faith, and hope in a new dawn.